Hi everybody, Ben Mays here with Williams Soaring Center. I'm standing here on the brand new paved runway here at Williams. We just got finished up a big project the last couple weeks, just started operations again. And unfortunately over the last couple weeks we haven't had the greatest soaring. We're kind of waiting for the offshore moisture to push in and change that pattern up a little bit. But while we're sitting here without any good soaring, I figured now is a good time to release one of the Valley Soaring Association winter webinar videos presented by Kempton Izuno. He talks a lot about more about the winter north wind wave operations we've been doing. Kempton's really been a pioneer in this north wind wave over the last few years and made it more of a three-dimensional thing out here where we're getting a lot more distance out of our flights and really kind of pushing the limits of what we can do in the wave. So I hope you all enjoy the video. Kempton's a great presenter, and we really appreciate everything he does here for the Valley Soaring Association and Williams Soaring Center as a whole. So I hope you enjoy it, and if you like the video, click the like and subscribe button, and I'll have more content posted here shortly.
All right, I'll let Kempton introduce himself in a second, but here's kind of the ground rules, you guys. If you have questions, you have a couple ways to deal with it. One, you can send a chat message. I'm going to be the chat message moderator, and I'll help Kempton out when he gets the right plate to answer the questions. Please ask any questions you like. There's also an ability down the bottom somewhere to raise your hand, but chatting is probably the best thing. And if you want to, say your question live, that's fine too. Anyway, the idea is to have the best we can, a little bit of exchange of information, questions and things. Kemp, you ready to rumble?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just one of those types that can keep twiddling and tuning in this until, I'm actually pushed out on stage. So I better assume I'm on stage.
Pushing you on the stage.
Well, thank you all for just having me here. I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this. This has been one of my pet interests for a while, so we'll hop into it in a moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kempton Izuno. I'm a longtime soaring pilot, been soaring since I was 14, and now have an ASH 25 partner in ASH 25 here in Williams. And what I really like to do is take other people up for cross-country mentoring and to explore wave cross-country. I mean, the thermals around here are fun and great convergence and all, but it's really the cross-country wave that I just find fascinating, and especially to do it outside of the Sierras. So I want to talk about that today, talk about the techniques. I think probably most of you have seen my article in Soaring, the part 1, about what people can do or what we've been doing along the coast here. It's not just Williams, but I'm going to talk now actually about what will be in part 2 in the March issue, which is more about techniques, weather forecasting, prep, and things like that. Okay, so like Pete said, just type questions in the chat or raise your hand, and then we'll get cracking here. So the agenda is we'll talk about wave cross country in general, and what I mean by that is specific more to Williams here, because there are, once you get outside of a main range, like a continuous range like the Sierras or the Appalachians, it becomes much different in terms of what you have to deal with in technique. Talk about some wet wave techniques, dry wave techniques, and actually a starter task if Alex Nayer's on. He's the one who put the bug in my ear on this at about 9:30 this morning. So, I added that and came up with some interesting data. Pilot and ship prep. And if we have some time, I will actually go through the forecast funnel live with some actual data, because we do have some wave days coming up. So, any questions on that?
You're good,
nope.
Kemp.
Okay. But I just want to point out this picture. It just showed up in my Instagram feed like a couple days ago. I had never seen anything like this before. And this is a Sherpa who covers Everest climbs. And just the texture and look of that, I've never seen anything like that before. So I just had to include that in the talk. Okay. And if Russ Pollard is on, Russ can answer this. I might be tapping on a couple of you for this. What is the #1 rule in wave cross country? The #1 rule is ABC. And for those of you who didn't know, Alec Baldwin is a glider pilot, and he teaches this. he always talks about always be closing, I mean, crabbing. If any of you have seen Glenn Ross, this is from Glenn Ross. But always be crabbing. That is the number one thing to keep in mind, because you're always fighting the wind. It's helping you, but you always have to counteract it to hold your position. So, for example, in this trace from Working Goat, that's the Goat Ridge on the upper right. So the wind is coming from it's about a 010-015 wind from the upper right. And so we're on the upside of the valley there in the lee of Goat. And basically what you're doing when you get into this is you're etch-a-sketching this, okay? And to be clear, this is a track. This is not a heading, okay? So going back to the ABCs, when you're going back and forth in this, you have to be staying so that you're paralleling the ridge. But because most people have been used to thermal flying, where you pretty much point where you want to go, especially in higher wind situations, the crab you have to have can be anywhere from 10 to 30, 35 degrees, depending on your ship performance and the velocity of the wind, in order to be able to parallel the ridge. This is a very non-normal behavior for glider pilots, and you just got to practice it. It's very much a video game. You're looking at the trace, you have the approximate axis of the ridge, and you have to go back and forth along that. Now, once you establish yourself in the lift, you kind of have to go upwind a little bit and then downwind a little bit, just kind of working around, because there's basically this elongated oval that defines the lift band. But especially if you don't have any markers, then it's up to you to kind of figure out where the strongest part of the lift is. And occasionally there can be a marker. Now I'm talking about a dry wave day. I'll go back and forth on these, but I'll let you know which mode I'm in, okay? So this is an example. This is from 2016 from a climb that I was in. This is actually from my first San Francisco flight. We're about 13.6 here, and that you see in the middle of the screen is a little shred of a rotor just downwind of us from the Goat wave. These come and go, and what's key for you in working, especially dry wave, is to be looking mostly down, not up, especially as you get higher, to be able to look for the markers. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show. This is actually part of a video here, so I'm going to run this video and see if it, you tell me if the quality is.
Yeah, I know, it's what's on here is kind of funky. Okay, so we're at 13.
Okay, you can't hear the audio, or I'm going to assume you can't hear the audio, but we're on about a east-southeast heading here, got 7 knots, 13.6. You saw that shred out there. That's Clear Lake. We're looking directly south. David Maruzzi, this would look familiar to you. Mm-hmm. And now, so I'm going to pause there. I'm going to move it back a little bit. What I find useful, okay, this is in late April, and you can see there's flooded rice fields out there. When you go back and forth in the wave, because of this crabbing that you have to do, and you're looking at your screen to try to keep your track approximately parallel to the ridge line, it really helps, for me at least, to pick some geographic point on the horizon and say, okay, when I'm going one way on the wave bar, I got to point at that object. And when I'm going the other way, I got to point at another object. And the reason is it's to try to simplify life for yourself, because you're trying to stay parallel to the ridge, but you can't keep on staring at the screen all the time, right? That's not a good practice. But once you have a couple beats back and forth and you establish that approximate parallel line, and by the way, you're looking for strong lift, then to keep life simple for yourself, pick something on the horizon. So you can't really tell in this picture, but the Sutter Buttes are out here. So I would say, okay, to myself, I'll say, okay, keep the Sutter Buttes right above the front pilot's clear view panel, something really simple like that. And that way I know when I swing around, that's my target, okay? So this minimizes the time that you actually have to have heads down in the cockpit. I'm going to open the clear view here just so you can get a quick view. We're looking, let's go back here a little bit.
Some roll clouds near Alder Springs.
Sorry. Okay, so this is the Goat Ridge below us. That's the Sutter, St. John straight out there. The wind is coming from slightly to the right of St. John, okay? So there's always going to be some headwind or tailwind, you know, whether you're going down one way on the ridge or on the other, you know, that you're doing. You know, rarely do you have it directly orthogonal to the ridge. So that's going to change how much crab you have, okay? So you don't have to worry about the geometry of it, although we're going to cover that in a moment. It's more like you just do whatever you have to do to stay parallel to the ridge. Okay, hope that makes sense.
Some roll clouds near Alder Springs.
All right. Pointed out the roll cloud below there. Those will come and go. The only value for that is to help show you where the lift might be strongest. If you're directly upwind of that, that's good. It's also just to reinforce, you know, your location in the wave. Okay, I already talked about this. That's the Goat Ridge down below, and we are indeed paralleling it. Okay, so it's important to know the geometry of what you're dealing with in terms of the wind. Okay, if you have like a 60 knot wind and you want to achieve a 60 knot speed. Now, this is if you're, you know, paralleling a stretch of a wave bar or something. Then if you indicate 64 knots, and this is at 17,000 feet, then you're actually doing a true airspeed on the nose of 85 knots, but you're only doing about a 60 knot ground track, okay? Again, all of this will be available afterwards, both as a replay and as a PDF, but I wanna be able to have this construct. You could take this, of course, and just by simple Pythagorean theorem, right? You know, a squared b squared square root thing, to be able to figure out whatever it is your indicated airspeed is versus the wind and what your ground track's going to be. Obviously, this favors higher performance ships. It's really tough to go cross country in a 126, whereas, and we'll get to this in a moment, to be able to have higher performance ship, especially when you have better speed at 80, 90, 100 knots, that's where you really need this, okay? Okay, so in talking with Alex, he said, you know, Kempton, a lot of what you talk about here sounds really neat, but, you know, a lot of people are on the fence about this, including myself, because I'm not really sure, you know, this is something I can do, you know, and Alex has an ASW 20, and, you know, can you talk to that a little bit? And I said, okay. So what I did is I put together this starter task, which we'll spend a few minutes on here, just to walk through the methodology here of what you do to be able to do a really basic first wave cross-country point-to-point flight, okay? So we'll start off here at the top of the first small arrow at the top. So you leave the goat wave, assuming you leave it at 17.7 or so, 17.8, and your target is St. Helena. Now let me step back for a moment. In the Mendicinos, experience has shown that basically there are 3 tentpole wave points. And what I mean by a tentpole is that they are really strong, they're reliable, and they are part of a major mountain feature. And those 3 tentpoles are St. Helena, Goat, and the east side of the Yola wilderness area, sorry, west side. Now, again, this is for an offshore wind. We haven't talked about an onshore wind yet. So when you leave the Goat wave, or any wave you leave in a point-to-point flight, it's really important to be able to check your next stepping stone. And often we found that right over the north side of Clear Lake, there's wave there too, because of that ridge right north of it. Sometimes it's not there, but most of the times it is. And it actually can be very strong. I've seen 12 knots out of that wave point. And so if you hit that, you just left go, you know, maybe you only lose a couple hundred feet getting to that wave point, but do a quick circle there. So you mark it on your trace because you don't need the altitude. But if you choose to come back to that, at least you've marked it, okay? So check that there's, and this is true in any case, if you're going along and you happen to hit some strong wave out in the middle of the blue in a place you didn't think there was one, throw a couple circles, even if you don't need the altitude, because it's all about these stepping stones to be able to get from one wave point to the next. Then you go downwind to St. Helena, you might lose 1,000 feet to get there, climb back up to 17.8, 17.7, and then you glide back to Williams. Now
So Kemp,
Hey, Kempton, that sounds pretty straightforward, and it's in the neighborhood, but what does that involve? Is this really doable for me? So I said, okay, so let's do the quick math here. In an ASW 20 at 85 knots or so,
Kemp?
and you got a 60 knot wind, you're basically looking at about a 13-to-1 glide into that wind from 17,000. You increase your speed a bit more to 95 knots, and actually it degrades your glide a bit. I remember reading someplace that basically said, faster is better when going upwind and wave. Well, that's not true. That's not necessarily true. And there's some, formulas for that. But basically, in this case right here, I just did the quick math. If we go up to 105 knots, you're now down to about a 12-to-1 glide. And it takes about a 14-to-1 glide if you leave St. Helena at 17.5 to arrive back at Williams at 1.5, 1,500 feet. You need about a 14-to-1 glide. So at 12-to-1, you're not going to make it. Okay, but it doesn't. It's not. You don't have that wind speed all the way to the ground. So as you descend, the wind speed tends to drop off. Not always, and again, you need to know this ahead of time and build this into your glide calculations. But if it drops off, typically at about 12,000, we see about 40 knots. If it's 60 knots at 18, and now you're at a 19-to-1 glide. Okay, getting better, and then you get down to 7,500 feet. Typically, you see more around 25 knots. With a 60 knot at 18,000 foot wind. So the point is that your glide gets better as you get lower. So my conclusion from this quick math study is that probably an empty 20 is a little marginal, but a 27 or better, or a 20 at a higher wing loading, you could do this kind of flying. And Rami did this kind of flying in an empty 27, for a number of years. So we know from experience that he glided back from St. Helena numerous times in his 27, and it was no problem. Okay, so we're being very conservative here, but the point is that that's a task that you can try out of Williams to be able to see, what this is like, and to be able to, have confidence in it. Okay, I'll pause there. Any questions or chat so far, Pete?
Can you hear me, Kempton? Kempton?
Oh, sorry. So I turned the sound down. Okay, yeah, sorry, Pete, go ahead.
You can hear me okay now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 2 questions. There's no questions on the thing, but I think there's a couple things to point out. You're assuming that at St. Helena, you're going to get into the wave, correct? To make your calculation
Correct.
work?
Right.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you missed the wave at St. Helena, and you're now down below 14,000 feet. What do you do?
So, and that's a very good point. So what I forgot to add to that slide, and I'll make a note to myself here, is if you're going to do this, have someone else go first. So in other words, typically on these kind of days, no, I'm being serious. If this is your first time and, you're Alex or David or somebody with a 20 to 27 or higher ship, and you have Rami and myself in front of you, and we'll go to the goat wave first. Yep, it's working. Okay, we'll go to St. Helena next. Yep, it's working. Okay, so it's working. Okay, and the database points are available. So that way, that was part of that assumption. I didn't put that in there.
All right,
but to
you
answer
missed
your question, if you either miss it, even if somebody did show you was there, then it would then really Lamson is the only reasonable alternative there.
You wouldn't go downwind to or crosswind to Healdsburg or Santa Rosa or Napa?
Yeah, you could also do those too. Lamson is in somewhat of a wind shadow, but also you look at the runway and it's a direct crosswind. If the wind did get down to blowing strong in Lamson, it would be a direct crosswind. Crazy Creek is not an alternative, so yeah, it would be either Lamson or one of the ones downwind. Yeah, Healdsburg or Napa.
Yes, I think the super important point for everybody to take away from this is that you need to have a backup plan if it's for some reason Mount St. Helena doesn't work. And you need to do the calculations beforehand to understand what altitudes and distance to make it all work right.
Correct.
So it just
go ahead.
No, I just want to point that out, that things don't always work as like you think they should. And if not, you need really honest backup plans.
Correct. Now, one of the things, and this is, Rami had to do this once, is on glide, is if you don't think you're going to make Williams, then there's strains also as a something on the way, as it were, towards Williams. Another alternative, assuming that the wind is from 010, we're talking about an offshore day only here, is to be able to go laterally, and your glide will be much better, and you could then hit something like woodland or something, because now you're going lateral and you're not burning as much of your altitude to try to fight into the wind.
And there's also the other thing is, looking at your map right now, Kempton, you have Healdsburg and also Ukiah as possible places if you end up
Yes.
in not very happiness. But at times it can be the best times, the worst of times flying wave, especially with the north wind we get here.
Yes. Now, so a key point to make here is that I had assumed 60 knots. Even if it's 5 knots more than 60 knots, and you get up into the goat wave, and it's like, forecast was 60, but now you're saying 70, I wouldn't do this task. You'd have to have, a ship like Phoenix or something better than that to manage that, because every knot that you go up in wind speed that you have to fight later becomes very expensive on your glide. Conversely, if the wave is working great at 55 or 52 knots, then all of a sudden, it makes it, your range is much bigger. So that's one of the things that I watch with the wave is, 5 knots plus or minus can make a big difference in terms of, your cross country speed and your achieved glide.
And John Cochran, thanks John for the comment, making a pretty good point. It says typically north wind in the valley at Williams and up or down the other valleys, the winds will change direction and speed, and it could be totally fine, or it could be a totally crazy crosswind like Lamson is. You just need to really think about, with the given runways and the likelihood of a crosswind, is this up to what you want to do or not? Because if you land off field, you'll probably not have any help for a while.
Yes.
So make sure you're up to the game.
Yeah, and so actually on that point, so probably, instead of 60 knots, maybe I should have picked like 50 to 55 knots for a starter day, if you get that kind of day, because to drop it down to 50 knots from 60, I mean, that's an enormous gain in your range and ability to get back. 50 knots back from at 18,000 feet from St. Helena would be no problem, right? But again, that's, because it makes a huge impact on the glide. Okay.
That's all the comments, Kim.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now let's talk about wet wave. Okay, so this actually is a picture from courtesy from Luke. So the reason a lot of people like having lenticulars, of course, is a marker. It's some reference point, and it's also basically similar to working a ridge. So conceptually, it fits into this model that most all of us have some kind of experience on. When you're below it, the lift can be weak coming up because, of course, you have to go around the front edge. And so sometimes, the lift might be stronger in the lee of the leading edge, but of course you have to get around the leading edge. So which means that the lift rate may drop off as you go forward. So you just have to be very patient, slow down a bit, and just, work your way up from that. And then once you get above the leading edge, like this picture is, then you have much more latitude in finding where the lift is, finding where the strongest lift point is. One of the things that I've typically found is that the tallest part of the lenticular is typically where the strongest lift is. So assuming what we're over in this picture right now is fairly thin, you can see down the track there's a much deeper stack there. And so that's probably where the stronger lift is. Okay. So some tips and considerations here. If you are working a set of wave bars and you want to transition up to the next lenticular, it's usually good to go around a lenticular, because if you try to go over the top of a lenticular, you not only need to fight the wind, but then there's going to be sink on the back half of the lenticular. So you need to be able to budget for both of those. So typically this could look like a 4-to-1 glide or a 7-to-1 glide, a very steep glide to be able to get over that. And so you just need to mentally prepare for that and be ready, as if you decide to go over the top, and you can just see by the way that your relative position is to the lenticular, you may or may not make it. It's better to go around the side of the lenticular, because when you think about it, I mean, a leni forms because the air is being lifted. Well, if the air is not being lifted, then you're not going to be getting any sink. You won't have any lift either, but at least you won't have any sink there. Okay. And also the lenticulars can move, so always check your GPS to know where you are. One of the insidious things I've found in working spot lenticulars is that you're working around it and you're concentrating on your lift rate, and you might actually be not necessarily on the windward side of the lenticular. You might be slightly off to one side or the other for whatever reason. That lift rate is good, but now you're at risk of being blown to the side or downwind of the leni. So just always check on your GPS to know where you are. Okay. So give me a second here. It just got darker in here. I'm going to turn on the light.
As Kempton's turning the light on, if you have any questions, please chat them. I got one spooled up that we'll get to Kempton in a moment.
Okay, I'm back.
So Kemp, I'm back. Hey,
Yeah.
There's one question from our friend John Cochran again, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, but it's kind of in the midst of things. How about goat to YOLO as a starter task, upwind?
That is actually an excellent point. That has more continuity, and you are going upwind. So, yeah, I put that slide together based on Alex's and thinking about St. Helena, but actually that there is some merit into that, because sometimes it's a little bit much to try to get up to like the Burn area or Black Butte. Even Rami has had to, and I have defaulted to downwind of Hull. But yeah, that could be another starter task too. So I can go over.
Yeah,
update the slides.
Yeah, kind of the idea of working crosswind and not getting too far away from Williams yet. Mitch Polinsky has a question. So Mitch, I hope you can unmute yourself. Mitch?
I'm going to change my background here.
Okay. Do I sound okay? Can you hear me okay?
We got you,
Yes.
Mitch.
Okay. This is a question. I had my hand raised, but I didn't use the chat function earlier. This is a question really that goes back to something you said a few minutes ago about circling to mark your spot. When you're flying along, you don't need altitude, but you said take a circle or two to mark your spot. Why not, in terms of increasing your speed, mark it just on your GPS device, create a waypoint at that point, and
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, you could do that too. I mean, it's, to me, if you've got that capability, and I'm sure that's in my iGlide, but I don't do that. It's just a way for me to also sample it too, because the issue with going downwind, Gavin Wills told me this. He said, go downwind at minimum sink. He says, if you try to go any faster than that, you'll be going so fast, you can blow right through the lift and you won't even know it was there. So the idea of circling is that you can sample whatever the lift is to be able to give you, okay, this is 4 knots, 6 knots, whatever. Yes, it does slow down your speed.
Uh-oh.
Okay. All right, so let's continue on. So minding the gap. So now when you're in a wet, if the lift quits, you have to have a backup plan, obviously, and some consideration for what you're going to do, because obviously that could turn into a very bad situation very quickly. What we find here sometimes is that as the moisture comes in, because this is prefrontal, when we're talking wet waves here, that there's more moisture, so the deck tends to expand and get deeper and move further east. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on distribution of the moisture, within the atmosphere. So what I'm going to cover now is an example of what not to do and some indicators that one should be aware of. And they were obvious, but did I pay attention to them? No. So this is almost a year ago. So let's cover this example. So there was a forecast for a prefrontal wave, and this is on February 15th. And Ted and I were going to take up two different people at the same time in two separate Williams K-21s, okay? So this is how things looked early in the morning, but things looked like they were gonna be drying out. You could see some kind of lenticular action. Okay, well, we'll just watch it. Well, a little while later, it did start clearing out. But, what is wrong with this picture? And what I'll tell you is wrong with this picture is that base of that cloud is only like 700 feet high. So the air is very saturated here. And so the risk for this to suddenly close up is very high. But is that how I interpreted this? No, I go, oh, look at that. It's a bar parallel to the range. So, wow, there's got to be wave on the other side of that. Okay. So we take off and I get into the wave. It's very weak wave. Now, for those of you who've done more wave flying, what is wrong with this picture? And what's wrong with this picture is that there is not a nice streaming look, the winds from right to left, of cloud. Yes, there is a phone gap, but the look of this is there's not this, just lines tracing across the top of lenticulars. It's a very wishy-washy looking wave. And at this point right now, I'm in the K-21 and we're in like maybe half knot to 1 knot. Meantime, Ted is also with his passenger and he can't get into the wave, okay? And you can start to see there's some moisture out there in the Central Valley, and Williams is like at our 8 o'clock at this position right now. This is the looking down towards the Cape Valley. So basically Ted said, I can't find the wave, and he got off and he says, and I can't see back to Williams, I'm gonna have to land someplace. And so he wanted landing up at Miller's, 5-6 miles south. Meantime, I'm with my passenger and I'm hearing Ted, under strain now. And I'm thinking, this is not a really high confidence wave. I better head back. And fortunately or unfortunately, my front seat passenger, she didn't know much better, which is probably fortunate. So at this point, especially this is our looking upwind. That was looking really crappy. There's no, really wind driven structure there. So we decided to, head back while we could. So this is going to be the video of that.
We're gonna have to break something. It'll be a pretty steep dive, okay?
So I'm telling her, you can't hear the video, but I'm telling her it's going to be a pretty steep dive. You can see there's not much in the way of hole there. There's more holes out to the east, and it's much clearer to the east, but we were, wanting to get back to the airport. Further, Rex had told me that there are several layers here. So there's this layer here at about 2,000 feet, and then there's another layer at about 700 feet, about, over the airport. So I asked him, do you think I can get through that to get back to the airport? He said, yes. So again, this is, if you ever get caught in these kind of situations, right? The issue is if you go through the hole, it might be so low as this was that you might not be high enough to get to a landing spot. So my only thing I had in my favor is kinetic energy. So I told my passenger, okay, I'm going to go through here near red line because I'm not quite sure where I am yet. I can guess we're about 3-4 miles away, but I want to be able to have enough, energy to be able to get under the deck and then be able to coast towards Williams. And so for those of you familiar with Williams, we just passed by the lumber area there. And, this is the development just south of the airport. And only now is the airport coming into sight, okay? And we landed fine. But as you can imagine, the owner of the hardware was not that happy, and rightfully so. So there was a bit of a safety meeting after this. So we'll just leave it at that. All right, any questions about that?
The questions are good, Kim. The comment from Mike Thompson is we can hear the video, but I think your live commentary is probably better. So we'll stick to having.
Agreed.
So,
My hands are sweating though, Kempton. Jeez.
Well, so were mine. And, it's kind of like this is one of those cases where multiple factors that I didn't pay attention to built up, and it could have had a very unhappy ending, and it didn't. But it was, had we waited 10, 15 minutes more, it could have really not been good. Which in that case, it would have been just go land at Calusa, okay? Because it was clearer further east. But as we all know, we can get fixated on getting to a particular destination, which of course is not necessarily the safest thing. Okay.
The other thing, Kemp, I think the other point is that if you waited 10 or 15 minutes on the ground to let things form one way or the other, it might have become clear about what's the right thing to do.
Right. And that's an excellent point too.
Yeah.
My takeaway from that event was, when you have the really low cloud bases, even if there are fairly wide gaps, that can change really quickly because of the low cloud base. It's telling you right there that the air is very saturated.
There was
Down low.
Kempton. There was a pretty positive takeaway from the safety brief, however, and you're still allowed to rent Williams gliders, which are two positive, right?
Well, one could look at that as kind of like, oh, you didn't die from the disease, so you're well, and you have got good antibodies now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So we'll go back to dry wave there. So because of that last incident and because of other incidents, Rami and I have come to favor dry wave because we don't have to deal with those damn clouds. And I can't believe as a glider pilot I'm saying that, but that's, those clouds on wave days can just become a nuisance. And so we've come to favor this. And so we're not limited. We can go as high as the lift will take us. As we pointed out earlier, look out for, the occasional shred and markers that you'll see there. But otherwise, there's usually no markers on dry wave days. However, dry wave days come with other risks. So the first is when you don't have a cloud next to you as reference, and you slow down and you're pointing into the wind, it can just be very disorienting because now your ground speed goes to 5 knots, 4 knots, and then it might say 5 or 4 knots again, but now that's 5 or 4 knots as you're going backwards. If you have one of those screens that flip-flops into the direction that you're going. I keep mine always north up, regardless, especially for this reason, because that way I can tell if am I slowly moving forward or am I slipping backwards. Okay. Actually, G. Dale covers this in the volume 2 of the Soaring engine, if you have that particular book. But I point this out because it can be very insidious, and you're looking at other things and you're trying to figure out where you go next, and so your mind's very busy trying to figure things out, and you really have to watch that. And then all of a sudden you notice I'm not in the lift anymore, and you think you were going forward, but then in actuality you're actually slipping backwards. So again, it helps to zoom in and be able to always have north up. The other thing which I notice is very tough for pilots is, again, this has to do with the geometry of the wind. One way, if you don't have a wind indicator or yours isn't working, to be able to figure out what the wind speed is you slowly turn into what you think is the wind direction. And when your ground speed becomes its slowest, then you do the 2% quick math rule to figure out what your wind speed is based on your indicated speed. The problem is if it's really weak wave, and you got to be very good at holding a heading, because if you wander 3 or 5 degrees in one direction or the other, especially with strong wind, it can start blowing you quickly downwind or to the side of where the lift is. So it's just this very interesting math and geometry that you have to do when you're just by yourself, up in space, basically not moving. And the other part of this is that if you're flying with somebody else, the FLARM target is not where you think it is. And so I had this happen with Rami and me on a very strong northeast wind day last year. So my nose was pointed northeast, but we were sliding in a northwest direction. Okay, so our travel is to the northwest, but it was like 40 degrees off from where my nose was pointed because I was at a relatively slow speed. Rami was directly off my left wing at 9 o'clock, but you look at the FLARM and it says he's straight ahead. Well, That's absolutely correct. He was straight ahead, but because most of us don't fly in these high wind conditions, this certain base assumptions like in FLARM, like, okay, well, it's always going to be ahead because that's what I've always seen. In this case, it was 90 degrees off. So I just throw that out there again. The misorientation that can happen when you don't have any other references on high wind days can just be, it can really throw you. Okay. So I hope that makes sense, but the wind can just really throw what you think's happening. So John, I'm going to credit this to you. This was John's comment. I'm not going to read this here, but it is a little intimidating to do cross country on high wind days, especially in dry wave wind when you're trying to push upwind. And John has a very good ship for it, the 31. So it's got a high wing loading and a modern thin airfoil. But still, it can be intimidating. The sight view from when you're up at 17,000 feet, it looks great. You think you can go anywhere, but as soon as you start pushing into the wind, you feel like you're one of those Acapulco divers, and you got a glide ratio of less than a brick. So, but it can be done. And like I said, I'll adjust my slides to talk that probably a good starter day would be, 50 to 55 knot day for winds. Comments or questions there, Pete?
None. You're all good. Any questions, anybody? Okay. Anybody? Nope. They're mesmerized, Kemp.
Thanks. Okay, so one topic, and by the way, everything I'm talking about here will be in the March issue of Soaring. The article I wrote for it is actually, it's kind of the script for this talk here, so there's a lot more detail in there. But one of the things I found that there's very little experience in is working weak wave right down near the ridge. So I found this picture because this picture really illustrates what at least has worked for me. So for example, and my latest experience with this was down in the Santa Barbara area. So when you have weak wind around the obstacle or ridge, the primary obstacle, and you can see in this picture slightly right of center, is the highest point. The wind tends to go around that obstacle. And when it does that, there's a bit of a Venturi effect. So it accelerates it on the shoulders of the primary obstacle. Now, this is assuming that the drop off on both sides of the obstacle is approximately the same in terms of, drop, because wave works because the wind has to get going down at least a couple thousand feet to get going. So I was working this in a STEMI with Terry Honigman in S12, and we had motored right level with the peak and couldn't find anything. And I said, let's go off to the side here. And so we went to a lower elevation right next to McKinley Peak and found 1 to 2 knots of lift. And I told him, this, let's do this, Terry, because it's so light, something like, 12 knots or something like that at the peak. Let's go off to the side. And it was a very stable day. Let's go off to the side of the peak and see if we can get something there. And sure enough, we did, got high enough to then go over the peak now at like 1,000 feet over the peak. And then we got in the climb there. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, Kemp, if there was wave behind the peak at a higher altitude, doesn't that mean that the lower air is also going up? You would think, but wave works in weird ways, and you would think that would be the case, but it wasn't. So I just throw that out there that's how to think about if you're stuck in that position where you're close to the ridge, you got a primary obstacle. What are you going to do? Try to find the wave there. Okay. So that's it for the wave stuff. We'll talk a little bit about prep, and then we'll talk a little bit about forecasting. I have come to find the Savior gloves and socks. They are just fantastic. They use interchangeable lithium-ion rechargeable batteries. They can get so hot that they feel like they're burning you. So I actually cycle them on and off. I have never had to use them continuously, especially the socks on any of my flights so far. fabulous. You can get them from Amazon. And because the socks and the gloves use the same batteries, you can interchange them. Going with a half on, full on, full off, 50% of the time, cycling the usage, I've gone for 5 hours and not had the batteries die yet, which is about right. They say 2 to 3 hours continuous usage. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff I could talk about, preparation, but that's these gloves and socks are the primary breakthroughs, I would say, in the last few years. And they were developed for motorcyclists. And so it makes a lot of sense. It's a high volume market. Okay, so let's talk about forecasting here. So how are we doing on time? Well, we're about 45
You're doing
minutes.
good. Yep.
Okay. So what I want to do, I'm going to switch over actually to a live web page because we do have some wave days coming up, it looks like. So this would be an excellent forum to go through and actually look at some live charts. Oh, come on, Zoom. You've hidden right behind the bar. There you go. Okay. So typically what I look at is a 12 Zulu GG weather, and this is in the slides there, but most of you have heard of this. But all of these sites, they just take the same GFS forecast from the National Weather Service. So let's take a look at the 700 millibar. My go-to, if I only had to look at one chart, it's a 700 millibar. And the reason for that is it works for thermal days to show moisture, and it works for wave days to show the winds, and how much rain, if any, there will be. So go there, and it goes out 16 days. Now, like any forecast chart, the further you go out, the less reliable it is. But these days, it's 5-6 days, you can be pretty confident in, confident meaning like 80%, except for cutoff lows. Because cutoff lows are very small features, they get pushed around a lot more, kind of like small Eastern European states versus Russia. Mm-hmm. So here is a setup coming, and this is the Monday forecast wave. So I wouldn't call this a cutoff low yet, but it's kind of has that look to it. So here we are. It's tough. It's maybe a bit tough to see this. That's the Bay Area where my cursor is. Can you see my cursor? Can people see my cursor, Pete?
Yeah, we can see it. Actually, this is kind of the classic backdoor slider that Doug Armstrong used to talk about.
It is. And because
backdoor slider's better.
Because of the blocking high up here, which is why we haven't gotten rain, that actually, if the setup is proper, I don't have the picture handy, but when you have this gearing effect, because the highs, the air rotates clockwise, and the low, they rotate counterclockwise, you can get this accelerated area, a very broad area of wind. Now, in this case here, this is going to bring us, at least with this forecast, a westerly flow, and it's not very wet on Monday, but it passes through very quickly. Okay, this is Tuesday morning, and this is Tuesday afternoon. So there is a northerly flow here, but it's not super. And what I mean by that is what we found by experience is that offshore flows require, it's the difference in quality of the lift between 010 and 030 is incredible. It's very nonlinear because now you're becoming more orthogonal to the ridge. And if you can get 040, that's just amazing. But that rarely happens. I think I've seen that maybe like 3 times. So right now, it's about 005 or so. So I go, okay, I'm not going to throw this one out yet. Let's go dig a little deeper. What I mean by that, let's go to the 850. Now the 850 is about the 5,000 foot level. So let's go take a look at that. And we'll go to Tuesday for that. Okay, we look a little closer. It's actually not even northerly. It's slightly to the west of north. So I'm going, that's not looking very good. It doesn't disqualify yet. GOAT will work, but the rest of the range, and usually I'm looking for something that will work from north of Eureka, down ideally to the Santa Cruz area. This is not that day. It'll be good for local wave, but not for lighting up the whole range. Okay, But let's continue on with this. Let's go back to the 700. Okay, so now I look further out. Let's just go through the whole 16 days here. Okay, we still have that northerly flow. And actually, it's becoming more easterly here, but it's not very strong. What I found, we typically need 15 knots or better at ridgeline height, which is around here is 6,000 to 7,000 feet, and 25 to 30 knots at 700 millibars, and at 50 knots or better at 500 millibars or 18,000 feet. Okay. So, like any person, I'm looking to see, well, is there going to be something good that happens on a weekend or a holiday? Okay, so I continue to look further, and then there's this one here for next Sunday, meaning like 8 days from now, and going, okay, this has some possibilities. It's here, but if we continue on, ooh, okay, now you got my attention. Now this, you can see by the barbs here, it is tilted over. It's only maybe 10 degrees more, but now it's tilted over, and it's on a holiday. So it's like, okay, no, this has got to happen because it's on a holiday, okay? But obviously this is 9 days out. So I won't get too excited on it, except with friends. But this has some possibilities. Let's continue on. That high is still, it's kind of fading there. And then possibly we might get some more stuff showing up. But again, this is, now we're almost 12 days out now. So this is in what I would call fantasy weather. You know, who knows if it'll happen or not. But the key thing I look for when I look this far out is, what is the mood of the weather? And what I mean by that is there is no blocking high. Okay, there's another blocking high coming in here. Oh, and look, there's another offshore setup. So what I'm gathering from this, you know, obviously you don't believe anything that's 360 hours out. But the point is, we have seen 3 to 4 setups here of offshore flow. So that's telling me that I have to watch my work commitments so that I am available on a Monday or Friday to be able to take advantage of this, or on a weekend. Okay, so that's my takeaway from this. You know, the first 6 to 7 days, that's where you zoom in on and can make some calls as to what you're going to fly or not. And then beyond that, it's more like you're saying, okay, there are enough setups possible that the weather, you still got this dang blocking high out there, but at least it might provide us with some soaring weather. Okay, that makes sense?
That was great, Kemp. No questions yet. Any questions from the universe? They're still in awe, Kemp.
How do you on that weather map? Where's Williams? I never really know how to see the ground on that weather map.
So that's a very William. Okay, so I always look for Nevada because that's a clear shape, or north of Baja, and then that little squiggle of brown there, that's the Bay Area.
I don't see that now. I see your slides.
Yeah, well, it's my cursor's right on it.
Here.
One thing so here is an alternate site, and I have this site because it takes the same data, but this site, for some reason, the images seem to be clearer. Let's click on one of these. So, there's the Bay Area there. I don't know what it is, the way that the GG weather site is rendered. This is actually an NWS site. And for whatever reason, sometimes it's tough to see the barbs. They get, munged in with something else. I can't tell, is that 30 knots or 20 knots? But for whatever reason, this site, and this link is in the presentation, it just seems to be a bit clearer to be able to figure out, what the barbs are saying and where things are at. Okay, so I hope that helps, David.
And then another comment, Kemp, which is a good a good thing. Windy.com is also another resource to see the flow of the wind, and you can do all the things that Kemp just talked about, but just in a different visual representation, which I like a lot. I use Windy a lot to kind of get a sense of what the air is doing.
Yeah, the thing about Windy, to me, what it's really good at is giving you a feel for lower level and interactions between things. So let's go out here to Monday. Okay, so this is that day, and this is 14,000 feet. Okay, the thing I like about windy is that you can pick a particular time, and so now let's go down to ridgeline level, and you go, okay, it's fairly parallel to the upper level flow, which is good in terms of aligning things. It's just not coming from the right direction. And maybe a little later in the day, doesn't really seem to change much. But I'm not too concerned about that because this is 8 days out, and things, it can disappear or it can get better. So we'll see. But yes, Windy's really good about that.
Now, one thing about Windy is if you notice on the bottom right, there's all these different models, and he's got GPS selected. And so you need to make sure the model you're using, there's 4 choices actually match what you want to do. I don't know what you think, Kemp, but I think GPS is probably the best choice.
Well, the European model, the ECMWF, is technically a better model, but there are tunings that people do. And of course, the US people don't really care about the European model to tune that. Technically, it's better, but because I am used to the GFS model and my brain is, whatever little things that they do to it, that's the one, it keeps consistent with what I've had in the past. Okay.
Yeah.
And you can also use the NAM model, which is the same model that's used for the RASP.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is Monday for that supposed offshore day. Okay, look at how quick, or sorry, for the onshore day. Yeah, but it's changing here, and we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
The important thing to know about Windy is it comes from Europe, so it defaults to the European model.
Correct. And yes, that's the right thing. That's the key point, is you always must select GFS. And if you make an account, that's the reason they want you to make an account, is that it'll keep things like whatever your preferences are, such as the weather model.
Yeah. And the European model does seem to be off on the winds compared to GPS is for the flying we do around out of Williams.
Yep, agreed. Okay, I think.
Hey, Kempton, this is Jim. I have a quick question. The offshore flow kind of limits a lot of us. I won't venture out there west of the Goat Ridge, and for that reason, you got one bailout down there at Lamson or somewhere, much less going up towards Gravelly in those areas. So can you speak a little bit to onshore flow and some of the conditions for those that sets that up, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so let's talk about that briefly here. So for the onshore flow, you have to have a front coming in. And the limiting factor, as I commented before, is that sometimes it can be too moist, or of course, like both kind of waves, the timing is bad. If you ever get asked the question, when's the best time for wave? The best time for wave is at night, because then that's when the air is most stable. Well, obviously that has its challenges too. But for typical west wind wave, you want it to be not too wet. So maybe 60% humidity, which is what's between these clear green lines. You want it to not pass through too quickly, because usually that means the front of moisture is coming in very quickly. And you want it to be able to have, 50, 60 knot winds at 18,000 feet. The nice thing about a prefrontal wave is that, of course, you're upwind, usually like in the lee of snow or something like that. So if things don't work out, you can always bail out to the Central Valley. So definitely that is prefrontal wave is the best for most people. It's more comfortable. It's more conservative. You have a lot more airports to choose from, and often you have markers. So for us, typically that season is from October to April, but we've had some great prefrontal wave days in September and in May. Did that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, it did. I just, I know, like I said, that north wind to northeast wind is, I'm not comfortable out there.
Right. Well, the other thing, which I actually didn't even touch on at all, is to try the Sutter Buttes wave. I mean, Rex and other people have been to 18,000 feet in that wave, and it's right next door. It's small. It's not super strong, but you can get 2 knots out of it. And it's like 8 miles away, 10 miles away. So that is always a choice to tow over there. That is also marked. It's right over the road that goes to Yuba City. There's like a quarry or a dump, something like that, to the south of the road. So it's between the quarry and the road.
So the Sutter Buttes wave, it's at the quarry, and the best trigger is the towers on top of the Sutter Buttes. But one thing to keep in mind is that it's very, spiky, all the hills. So the wave tends to be very long, not very wide. You tend to run racetracks right into the wind. But it works out great. The quarry is a place to start, but it sometimes slides around to the west in places you wouldn't expect. I've been to 18 there a couple of times.
Yeah, it's a great starter spot. I mean, what is that? It's not even that. It's like, it's about 6-7 miles there, and you got Colusa County right next to it. I mean, for just getting some wave experience in locally, that's a great place to start with.
There it is. But you got to be careful of the airspace out there, because you can slide yourself to the airspace to the east.
Well, right. I mean, you don't go over here to Beale. Because the actual wave spot's very small.
Yeah, it's super small, but actually what Cochran did a few weeks back, to the northeast, he found a tertiary or something off the Sierra. So, and I've been up there too, headed towards Chico, and you can slide yourself a little farther east than you think. So
John has a comment about that, John, if you're still on.
Yeah, he texted me something, so we'll start with that. From the Goat Wave, you can also typically fly back to Williams, as we usually do. If it doesn't work out, the wind is very north, so it's a crosswind glide back to Williams. So if you get up in the Goat, highly likely you're going to be able to get back to Williams someday, because it tends to be more crosswindy. That's a good point.
Right. So just to address more what John commented on earlier about a possible north task, what he's referring to is, so if we have Goat down here and Snow is a so-so wave generator. You'd think it'd be better because it's bigger and all, but for whatever reason, it doesn't have a nice clean backside here, but you can get something here. The trick is to be able to get, here's Blackbutte up here, which often in a northeast wind wave works, but that's a fair distance to go here. So sometimes if you get to 18,000 and it's not very windy, you could take a direct track to that. And if that doesn't work, then the Sanhedrin range here, I've been on that numerous times in the northeast wind. This is a very reliable area also. It parallels the Goat range here. This can work, and also in the Hull, the lee of the Hull range here too.
Mitch has a question. Mitch, are
Yes.
you unmuted?
I am unmuted. My question is, you're going to talk about SkySight's forecast of wave, whether you use that and what you think about it.
I use it. I don't have an LX to be able to map on to my flight trays. Rami does that with good success. SkySight around here tends to be a little bit more conservative on the wave forecast, which is good. But it's good. I mean, it's nice when you have several, a couple different, two basically, right? RASP and SkySight to reinforce the forecast. So yeah, I use it too. It's particularly good because it goes out 5 or 6 days, 6 days, I think. And RASP is only good to, at least the local Williams RASP is only good to 3 days. There's the NorCal RASP, which goes out 6 days. But the NorCal RASP and the Williams RASP use the same models. They just go out further, whereas SkySight has its own models. And I think it's good to have that diversity in models, because if they both are saying similar, then that tends to give you better confidence, higher confidence. So actually, I'm gonna, did that answer your question, Mitch?
Yes, thanks.
So actually, now that I think about it, what actually might be a more conservative northeast wind task is to go to Sanhedrin, because you could, from here, it's a crosswind to here. This is pretty reliable. And in fact, and I've gone all the way up to Dos Rios, and this works up to there. So actually, now that I think about that, that would be a much more conservative thing, is goat to Sanhedrin to Dos Rios and back. Because if it's always about the last stepping stone. So if you're on Sanhedrin and you start going this way and it doesn't work, well, you just retreat. So always make sure that the last one works so that you can go on to the next one. But that would be a pretty good run. That's that'd be about 30 miles, 35 miles out and back, and you're essentially doing a crosswind wave flight there.
Kempton,
Yes.
just back to your previous point, the two RAS, the NorCal and the Williams one, in a way they're the same, in a way they aren't. So you have to remember the NAM data only goes out 3 days, but the GFS goes out, I forget, 12, 14 days, whatever it is, it's a lot farther out. And that's one of Jack Glendenny's points, is that the GFS data is a broader, I forget what the grid sizes are now, but anyway, it's bigger grid sizes, so not as accurate.
Yep.
So his whole point was why, it becomes so inaccurate that he didn't see any point in going out any farther. So just, that's just a point.
So that's good to know. So just for my clarity, the RASP model is based on NAM, and the NAM set is not the GFS interpolated. It's a completely different set.
It's only, it's only North America, where when you switch to GFS, then you can go anywhere on the planet. So the North America stuff is a finer grid than the GFS.
Okay, but I guess my point is it's not NAM. The Williams RASP data is not just a shortcut of the GFS data in finer interpolated grid.
Correct.
It's actually a completely separate set as opposed to the GFS.
Correct. Yeah, the rest of the world is anybody who's using the RASP. So any of the newer, using the later WRF model and all that kind of stuff, that's all GFS. Where the old style RASP is local. No.
Okay.
A couple things, Kemp. First off, John Cochran put up the RASP for the NFS host guys in the comments here in chat, and I put up the WSC RASP. Both cases we put the links to that. And the other thing, for the people who don't know who that just was talking about raspy stuff, that was a famous Andy Hogman, and he's the keeper.
Yay, Andy!
He's the keeper of the Williams RASP. He hosts it, takes care of it, and when it blows up and everybody gets cranky, he fixes it. So everybody deserves to buy Andy a beer the next time you see him, or whatever beverage he likes. But anyway, thanks to Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
Hey, Kempton. I don't know if you made
Yes.
note of that, but you were just talking about going back to Sanhedrin, do Rios, that jumping back, and you go, hey, if you don't make it, you always go back down your stepping stone and go grab the one prior. Maybe you talked about it earlier, but do you have a minimum altitude that you go, hey, I don't want to try and contact anything out there less than 10?
So that's a good question. So usually we get into the goat wave at about ridgeline height, maybe a little bit higher than ridgeline, so like 6,500 or so. Once you get up in goat wave, at least to 17 or so, although I've left it lower, but generally you try to get to 17 or higher. Then sliding over, even in a 70 knot wind over to Sanhedrin, you probably only lose, 2,000-3,000 feet. So now you're over there at, 14 or so, which is still plenty of height, to come back, and you can come back the goat wave. The thing with these kind of flights, because they cost so much when you need to go upwind. For myself, I would I go down to, I've been down to like 10,000 or so, 9,000 before I get a wave. For others, even Rami, his height is a little higher. He doesn't like to get down below, 12 or 13, because again, when you go upwind, it just feels like, the ground's coming up at you like this. So, yeah, I wouldn't, for most people, I would think 10,000 is probably a good number, 10 to 12,000, and probably most people aren't even going to get to that, because as soon as you experience, that death dive look of the ground coming up at you, it's intimidating. So to say, oh yeah, I'm going to keep going down to 10,000 feet, you go, forget that. I'm retreating. I mean, even for myself, with all my experience in these waves, it's still tough for me to, push on over and then just, okay, there goes 6,000 feet. Poof.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, I really think anything, I like Rami's idea of 12 to 13, to tell you the truth, Kempton, especially for the new people in the audience.
Yeah. I think that's a good reasonable floor. So any other thoughts or comments? I think we're coming up on, I don't know if it's an hour and a half for this.
It's over an hour, but we got another comment from Mr. Cochran, which I'll share with everybody. His comment is, it's rare to find wave below the top of the upwind ridge, so the actual altitude depends where you are. Also depends on the wind profile. Sometimes no wind down low. He's actually, it's a good point. You really want to try to stay probably at least a couple grand above the top of the hills, if not more, to stay in the flow.
Which again points to 10,000 minimum.
Yeah.
Or so.
You won't want to be out there below 10, trust me.
Well, like I said, after you do one of these death dives, it just feels like 12 feels low.
Yep.
No argument here.
But isn't it also like coming off the freeway at 70 miles an hour and then hitting a city street of 25? All of a sudden it feels like, how can I go that slowly?
Yeah, it's spookier though. It's like, oh my God, these trees are big. And the places to land, you got to be very careful to always understand where your backup plan is if you get completely flushed.
Agreed.
No other comments on the chat line. Any other comments from the audience? Well,
No,
looks like
good stuff, Kempton. Lot to think about.
So, yes.
We'll wrap this up unless there's any more questions for Kempton. And Ben, I'll hand it over to you to closing remarks and to turn the recording off.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. And if you want to see those presentations live, remember every winter we do our VSA Winter Webinar Series. You can sign up for the Williams News Group to keep informed on what's going on around the area. And starting in January, we'll have the 2023 webinar series going. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at williamsoaring.com. And thank you. Have a great day.